Declassified. Just before leaving office, Trump releases a secret document on countering China in the Indo-Pacific. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. You should be using a VPN, like Surfshark, to protect yourself whenever you go online. So, as Donald Trump reluctantly hands the keys to the White House to Joe Biden today, there's one thing he's leaving behind: a giant painting of himself in the Oval Office. Just kidding. I think. But Trump is leaving behind his administration's strategy to counter the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific is a term that the U.S. government started using under the Obama administration to refer to the Asia-Pacific region plus areas connected by the Indian Ocean. Other countries are also using the term Indo-Pacific, like Japan, which calls for a free and open Indo-Pacific, and Australia, which has their own Indo-Pacific strategy. The Indo-Pacific region is home to 1/3 of the world's economy and nearly 2/3 of the world's population. For decades, even centuries, the dominant power in the region has been China. But the U.S. has been trying to change that. And we know that because just 1 week before stepping down, President Trump declassified his administration's strategic framework for the Indo-Pacific. The document was written in 2018, mainly by Matthew Pottinger, a former China journalist and Marine Corps officer who later became Trump's deputy national security advisor. But it's been kept secret until now. To sum it up, the strategic framework is largely about countering the Chinese Communist Party's aggressiveness in the Indo-Pacific. And aggressive they have been. From militarizing artificial islands in the South China Sea, to sending jets into Taiwan's airspace, to trying to take over Indian territory along the Himalayan border. And on the diplomatic front, the Chinese regime has successfully cozied up to governments that used to be more allied with the U.S., but felt the U.S. let them down during previous administrations, like South Korea, which felt the U.S. didn't protect them when China punished them for installing the American THAAD missile defense system, and the Philippines, which felt the U.S. let the Chinese Navy take over the Scarborough Shoal, and Thailand, which was angry that the U.S. backed off after the military coup in 2014. As the U.S. government backed off, the Chinese Communist Party filled in the gap. Part of the U.S. strategy to counter the Communist Party is ideological. The Trump administration believes that countries in the Indo-Pacific region should have national sovereignty, freedom of navigation, respect for individual rights, rule of law, and free markets, whereas the Chinese Communist Party believes the country should bow down.
You will respect China's authority!
That reference is from 1998. How does that make you feel? So in many ways, the U.S. strategic framework is about laying out U.S. beliefs, but it's also about action. One of the goals in the strategic framework is to create a security framework with India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, known as the Quad. And the Trump administration did it. Through a series of collaborations, military agreements, and joint naval exercises, the U.S. has helped strengthen the alliance with these democracies to resist China's influence. Another U.S. goal is to enable Taiwan to develop its own effective defense strategy and the ability to engage China on its own terms. And the U.S. has largely done that too, at least when it comes to weapons sales. In 2020 alone, the U.S. approved a $1.8 billion sale of rocket launchers and artillery to Taiwan, then another $2.4 billion for coastal defense, then another $600 million for aerial drones, then another $280 million for communications systems. 2020 was a great year to be an arms dealer. But it was also a great year to be a U.S. diplomat, because the U.S. has sent a number of top-level diplomats to Taiwan. The message is clear. America won't let Taiwan down just because the Chinese Communist Party is making threats. And also, it would look really bad if the next U.S. administration didn't continue this policy. Hint, hint. But there's a lot more to this policy, which I'll tell you about after the break. Welcome back. Another key part of the U.S. strategic framework is to prevent China's industrial policies and unfair trading practices from distorting global markets and harming U.S. competitiveness. One of the ways the U.S. has done that is through putting tariffs on Chinese imports. Then more tariffs. And then even more tariffs. This policy has reduced the U.S. trade deficit with China, or at least made it grow less quickly. It's also encouraged U.S. companies to pull out of China, even before the coronavirus. Those companies are not necessarily returning to America, but at least the shift to other countries has reduced the Chinese regime's ability to use unfair trading practices to distort global markets and harm U.S. competitiveness. So, objective partially achieved. A combination of U.S. policy and the coronavirus has also convinced U.S. allies to pull out of China. The Japanese government is forking out $500 million to get companies to leave China and return to Japan. Another key U.S. objective is to maintain an intelligence advantage over China and protect the U.S. and its allies from Chinese intelligence activities. To that end, the U.S. has done a lot. The Trump administration strengthened the Treasury Department's ability to block Chinese investments that pose a security risk to the U.S. The U.S. has also gone after people at universities who have been working as spies for China. And last year, the U.S. closed the Chinese consulate in Houston because it was being used to steal trade secrets. Plus, the FBI has protected Chinese people living in the U.S. by countering the Communist Party's Operation Fox Hunt that tries to force people to return to China or they'll be thrown in prison. So 2020 was not a good year to be a Chinese spy. And overseas, the U.S. created a 5G Clean Network initiative to keep Communist Party espionage operations out of global telecom networks, and more than 50 countries have joined. Plus, the U.S. worked with other members of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance to build a special coalition to counter Chinese espionage. The Five Eyes includes the U.S., Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and somehow, the Trump administration even got other countries to team up with Five Eyes, including Germany. And here I'd heard Trump wouldn't even shake their hand. I guess that was wrong. So this part of the strategic framework has seen real success. Also, I had mentioned that some former allies had pulled back under the Obama administration, like Thailand and the Philippines. Well, there's a section of the U.S. strategic framework about Southeast Asia. A lot of it is redacted, but it does seek to strengthen ASEAN, the coalition of Southeast Asian nations. And in particular, it seeks to promote a development model that provides an alternative to China's One Belt, One Road. Now, as I mentioned, the U.S. strategic framework for the Indo-Pacific is largely related to China. But it's only one piece of the Trump administration's China strategy. In fact, the 10-page document repeatedly references another document called the U.S. Strategic Framework for Countering China's Economic Aggression. And that one is still classified. If they showed it to me, they'd probably have to kill me. And that's just not worth it, just to read some policy report. There's also a whole section about North Korea, plus references to a separate strategic document about North Korea, which is also classified. But I'm not going to get into the Korea stuff in this episode. This isn't North Korea Unjushade. Annyeonghaseyo, and welcome to North Korea Unjushade. I'm your dearest leader, Chris Chappell. I wonder if that show would get demonetized too. But I think the real success of this strategic framework on the Indo-Pacific is not the accomplishment so far. It's that the Trump administration has made it public, and that puts pressure on future administrations to stick with it. It's basically the policy equivalent of Trump hanging a painting of himself in the Oval Office. I'm looking at you, Joe. And this episode has been sponsored by Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN that lets you protect your identity when you go online. It helps you hide your IP address. That's important if you're in China or another authoritarian country, where internet police could be watching which subversive YouTube channels you watch. Even in free countries, though, giant corporations and individual hackers may be monitoring the websites you visit in what you post online. And with Surfshark's camouflage mode, even your internet provider can't tell that you're using a VPN. That helps you stay private. Plus, Surfshark's clean web mode lets you browse the internet free from ads, trackers, and malware. So stay safe by using Surfshark. Try it out with our special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan, plus 3 extra months for free. Go to surfshark.com/uncensored. For just $2.21 a month, you can get Surfshark on all your devices. So click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.